Developing tonight, 2 days in a row, the White House has had the chance to comment on this nurse's behavior. And 2 days in a row, it has taken an apparent shot at Maine, saying Ebola policy is up to the states, but science should really prevail. Here's the president yesterday.
So I guess my biggest message, and I'm pretty sure this is a message that all the folks behind me, including the ones with the white coats, would confirm, is that it's critical that we remain focused on the facts and on the science.
Earlier this evening, I spoke with Charles Krauthammer about it. He's a Fox News contributor and author of Things That Matter, which is on the New York Times bestseller list with over 1 million copies sold. And when I talked to him, it was much colder in the studio. Charles, it's all about the science, which is code for don't quarantine returning patients.
You know, I love the way Democrats, they have this long history of claiming to be the party of science, while Republicans or anybody who opposes them are the party of obscurantist superstition. They did that with, for example, climate change. This is now settled science. They did that with embryonic stem cell research. If we only had that, we'd already have a cure for Alzheimer's and paralysis. It's all nonsense. This is the same kind of theme. So explain to me, Mr. President, how is it that it is science to not have a quarantine for a civilian nurse, but to have the Department of Defense, which the last I heard is a part of the U.S. government, declare a 21-day quarantine for any soldier who serves in these hot zone countries? Does the virus actually decide whether it's going to multiply and kill the patient on the basis of whether it's a nurse who's a civilian or a soldier who's a member of the military? This is not science. This is policy, and I think the administration is advocating the wrong policy.
In the meantime, we have this nurse who basically says, you know, just go ahead and try to quarantine me because I know better than you do, and I think you're being arbitrary, and I'm telling you I'm not a danger to the public. Your thoughts on her?
Look, there is something, of course, arbitrary whenever you have a protocol. A protocol simply means if you meet criteria A, B, and C, you're going to be in quarantine. And yes, there will be exceptions, and there might be a case in which the risk is extremely low, but you have to have a policy like that, or you don't have any public health system. You want to protect the public. We know that if you have a fever, you might have the infection, and then it incubates for 3 weeks. She says, I know I don't have it. She doesn't know she doesn't have it. You won't know till the 3 weeks are up. And if there's even a chance, a very low chance of you having it, you shouldn't be out in the public. You shouldn't be risking the public health. And you cannot have individuals deciding, well, I'm an exception, I'm not one who's got the virus, and thus I will exempt myself. You have to have the rules. It is a violation of civil liberties. There's no question that a quarantine is essentially either house arrest or incarceration somewhere in nice conditions. It doesn't have to be harsh conditions, but nonetheless, yes, of course it is. But we do that in epidemics, and we have done so since antiquity. It's been done for literally thousands of years to prevent contagions.
And if you have individual patients declaring for themselves whether they are dangerous or not, you're headed down a slippery path. Let me ask you about the federal government's messaging on Ebola. I mean, we've had different sort of assertions on whether it would come here and how it would be handled. Now we're having the president urging us to, you know, follow the science, and yet we had the CDC tell us a week ago that that nurse should never have gotten on an airplane even though she was symptom-free. It's tough to know what to believe.
And remember, the cure for all this, for the contradictory messaging, the over-promising, the protocols that had to be changed almost every week, was going to be the new Ebola czar, who was nowhere to be seen. I think, actually, he's probably himself in self-quarantine. Where the heck is the guy?
He wants nothing to do with this. Meantime, I thought it was interesting yesterday how President Obama used the Ebola press conference to make a point on which he's been hit in the past when he has refused to say that he believes in American exceptionalism, or he qualified it by saying, well, I believe in it the same way the Germans believe in, you know, German exceptionalism. And here was his message on why we should get behind the science yesterday on Ebola.
I'm a firm believer in American exceptionalism. You know why I am? It's because of folks like this. It's because we don't run and hide when there's a problem.
Your thoughts on that, Charles?
Well, he's now spent half a decade trying to undo the damage of his obvious rejection, and you know that he doesn't really have that sense of American exceptionalism, although he now repeatedly says, of course, he does. But this isn't a question of American exceptionalism. This is a question of simple, hard-headed public health policy. Do you have a quarantine? Do you try to protect the public? And yes, we understand that if there's going to be a quarantine, there will be somewhat of a disincentive for somebody who wants to go over and treat these people in West Africa. But think about this. How much of a disincentive is that? Compare the 21 days you're going to have to spend at home, watching television and catching up on books, to the risk of catching Ebola and dying a horrible death if you go over there in the first place. Anybody dedicated enough to do that, to take the time and to take the risk, is somebody who I think, in the same spirit, ought to say, okay, I'll give it 3 weeks at home as a way to protect the public in my own country.
Charles, thank you.
Pleasure.
Hot now. They turned up the heat. I just ripped those sleeves right off. Feels so much better.